want to live. I want to last longer to see my children grow up, grandchildren, see what they become.
Tonight, a Marine Corps veteran in a battle for his life. He and others contend he's being unfairly denied a chance at an organ transplant. And they're pleading for something to change before it's too late. Here's AJ Legault with the latest in his 2-year investigation: distance, delays, and denial.
Hi, Julie. In the interest of transparency, we're going to tell you up front that the VA labels the premise of this investigation as false and parts of it as offensive and inflammatory. We'll let you watch and decide for yourself.
5:30 a.m. on the longest day of the year. The sun already up on the Leech Lake Reservation in northern Minnesota as 66-year-old Frank Sherman leaves home on an all too familiar trip.
This is what I do for 3 days a week.
Every Monday, Wednesday, Friday for more than 3 years.
This is my life.
Frank has a date
I never missed a day here.
with the dialysis machine.
If I stop doing it, I ain't gonna be here no longer.
The dialysis doing the job Frank's failing kidneys no longer can.
Time is wasting.
Dr. Jason Bidash was, until recently, Frank's nephrologist. He says the average lifespan of a dialysis patient is 5 years.
Without a transplant, is this a death sentence?
Yes.
Frank was a sergeant in the Marine Corps. The VA lists his kidney problems as service-connected, likely caused by Camp Lejeune's contaminated water. But when it comes to putting Frank on the kidney transplant list, the VA has so far refused.
So the whole thing just stunk.
Hugh Quinn recently retired as Itasca County's Veterans Service Officer. Frank's transplant denial haunts him.
Yep. Why? I don't want to see Frank die.
Quinn reached out to KARE 11 about Frank's case. He'd been following our now 2-year investigation exposing deadly delays, dubious denials, and prohibitive travel requirements in the VA organ transplant program. A VA whistleblower claimed were costing lives.
How many patients do you think unnecessarily died because of this system?
Thousands.
The reporting sparked Congress to write new legislation.
This is, again, one of those things that's just smart, all in the interest of the best care for our veterans.
And President Trump just last month signed reform measures into law as part of the VA Mission Act. It allows veterans to get transplants closer to home and gives more control to their primary care doctor.
Yes.
How the new law could affect Frank's case remains to be seen. But his primary care physician at Cass Lake Hospital, Dr. Becker, writes there is no valid reason for him not to be selected for a transplant. The Minneapolis VA's chief of nephrology referred to Frank as an average risk candidate for kidney transplant. Dr. Bidash concurs.
I think that he would make a good transplant candidate.
So why, in spite of those doctors' opinions, is Frank being denied a transplant? The VA says it's because he's not mentally alert enough to follow medical instructions. In a letter to Senator Amy Klobuchar, Minneapolis VA Director Patrick Kelly explains the primary reason for the denial. Due to his limited functional status and vascular dementia with significant neurocognitive deficits, he is not an acceptable candidate. Dr. Bidash thinks the VA made a life-threatening mistake.
Frank, in my opinion, does not have significant neurocognitive deficits.
His regular doctor in Cass Lake agrees, writing of the claim that Frank has cognitive impairments. This is simply not true. And Frank's Indian Health Services social worker writes he has an excellent memory.
But we've got a great candidate for a kidney transplant. Get it done. Quit screwing around.
So what's the basis of the VA's claim of severe neurocognitive deficits? We found the answer buried in Frank's records. He was given a pair of neuropsychological evaluations to determine whether he could care for himself post-transplant. Frank failed.
Saying that I can't remember things.
Frank says he was asked to recall lists of words and names, but struggled because he doesn't read well since he grew up speaking Ojibwe. What's more, the test included words he says he'd never heard before.
And then they think that's because you don't know a word, they think that's a memory. It's not a memory. It's a word you don't know.
A note from his first exam raises serious questions about the accuracy of the VA testing. patient performance was scored on Caucasian norms due to lack of Native American norms available. Notes from follow-up testing in 2016 state cross-cultural factors may have contributed to suppressed performance, and results may therefore potentially underestimate his true level of cognitive functioning. But they denied him anyway.
That doesn't surprise me.
What does that say to you?
It says it's a biased system.
When KARE 11 contacted the VA about Frank's case, they defended their testing, claiming the suggestion it discriminates against Native Americans is completely false, offensive, and defamatory. And unlike their letter to Senator Klobuchar, which focused on Frank's so-called neurocognitive deficits, the VA listed other issues, ranging from missed medications to not using his CPAP machine, as primary reasons for his denial. Problems Frank's own doctors think are overblown.
I think the VA system is really set up to look for reasons to disqualify patients rather than to look for reasons to give them a kidney transplant.
I'm proud to do it.
Despite the toll dialysis plays on his body, Frank spends hours each week maintaining his tribe's Veterans Cemetery Park, which he created in honor of an uncle who was a World War II POW.
It's a lot of work. I feel that it's my duty to take care of our veterans because they sure took care of us.
He now questions why the government he so proudly served has given him what his doctors say amounts to a death sentence.
I told my children, I says, whatever happens, I lived a good life.
The VA now tells KARE 11 they are willing to reevaluate Frank's suitability for a transplant if he shows a trend of at least 6 months improvement, including not missing medications. We'll let you know what happens.
So they don't take his doctor's opinion into account at all?
Apparently not. Every one of his medical professionals who deals with him regularly says he has no severe neurocognitive deficits. He's never missed a day of dialysis in years. The dialysis clinic says he's doing fine. His own nephrologist says he's doing fine. His primary care doctor says he's fine. His Indian Health Services social worker says he's fine.
All right, well,
this
glad
is what
you're
we
on
got.
the story.
So
Keep us
he
updated.
started that 6 months, so hopefully he sticks with it, and we'll see what happens.
We've been told he's fully complying with his medications and has been for some time.
In June, a KARE 11 investigation found a Minnesota veteran was denied a life-saving kidney transplant. And it raised questions about whether a VA testing discriminated against Native Americans. Tonight, an update about new tests and new hope for a veteran wrongly denied. Here's AJ Legault with the latest chapter of his 2-year investigation into the VA's organ transplant program that we call Distance, Delays, and Denial.
That small commuter jet from Bemidji, taxiing to the gate at MSP, has a passenger on board who's been on a seemingly never-ending journey.
Oh, it's been about a good 6 years.
For Frank Sherman, this stop in Minneapolis is just a quick layover.
Yep.
On a trip that's been filled with stops, starts, and delays, but now finally, momentum.
Going our direction, I guess.
When we last saw Frank, the Marine Corps veteran was hooked up to a dialysis machine on a slow march towards what his doctors told him was the inevitable.
Without a transplant, is this a death sentence?
Yes.
Frank's kidney problems are tied to his time in the Marines, likely caused by Camp Lejeune's contaminated water. But the VA refused to put him on the transplant list, claiming he's not an acceptable candidate because of significant neurocognitive deficits. A claim Frank's private kidney specialist, Dr. Jason Bidash, labeled a life-threatening mistake.
Frank, in my opinion, does not have significant neurocognitive deficits.
Frank grew up on the reservation speaking Ojibwe and does not read well, so he did poorly on a standard memory test used to determine whether he could care for himself after the transplant.
Because you don't know a word, they think that's a memory. It's not a memory. It's a word you don't know.
But when KARE 11 dug through Frank's VA test records, what we found raised serious questions about their accuracy and fairness, including this note. Patient performance was scored on Caucasian norms due to lack of Native American norms available.
What does that say to you?
It says it's a biased system.
After KARE 11's report aired, the VA gave Frank a new evaluation. To the surprise of no one who knows him, it states, current exam results do not support a diagnosis of major neurocognitive disorder. In other words, Frank's memory is fine.
Been a long time since I've been on a plane.
Which brings us back to the airport. The VA is now flying Frank and his daughter Jackie to their transplant facility in Pittsburgh for pre-transplant prep work.
Mr. Sherman, thanks so much for flying with us and have a safe trip.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
There's no guarantee of transplant, but after years of denial, Frank is finally headed in the right direction.
I hope so. I really hope so.
For KARE 11 Investigates, I'm AJ Legault.
Thanks for joining us. We begin with some positive news tonight. The VA has reversed its denial of a kidney transplant to a Native American veteran from Minnesota in the wake of a KARE 11 investigation.
AJ Legault joining us with the latest development in his 2-year distance, delays, and denial investigation into the VA's organ transplant program. AJ?
False, offensive, and inflammatory. That's how the VA labeled the premise of our investigation before it even aired. We were raising questions about whether VA testing discriminated against Native Americans. What we exposed was a veteran wrongly denied a life-saving kidney transplant. That's now changed.
When we first introduced you to Frank Sherman, the Marine Corps veteran was hooked up to a dialysis machine. On a slow march towards what his private kidney specialist, Dr. Jason Bidash, said was the inevitable.
Without a transplant, is this a death sentence?
Yes.
Frank's kidney problems are tied to his time in the Marines, likely caused by Camp Lejeune's contaminated water. But the VA refused to put him on the transplant list, claiming he's not an acceptable candidate because of significant neurocognitive deficits. Frank grew up on the reservation speaking Ojibwe and does not read well. So he did poorly on a standard memory test used to determine whether he could care for himself after the transplant.
Because you don't know a word, they think that's a memory. It's not a memory. It's a word you don't know.
But when KARE 11 dug through Frank's VA test records, what we found raised serious questions about their accuracy and fairness, including this note. Patient performance was scored on Caucasian norms due to lack of Native American norms available.
What does that say to you?
It says it's a biased system.
After KARE 11's report aired, the VA gave Frank a new evaluation. It found current exam results do not support a diagnosis of major neurocognitive disorder. In other words, Frank's memory is fine. Tuesday night, he got the call he'd been waiting for. He's officially on the organ transplant list. It just took a 6-year fight.
Once a Marine, always a Marine. Simplify.
Semper Fi, Frank. Being on the official transplant list is not a guarantee that Frank will get a kidney in time to save his life, though. But he says now at least he's being given a fair fighting chance.
Too bad it took this long.
It is. Yeah. He's been waiting a long time for this, so
Great
great news today.
Thanks, AJ.
Thanks, AJ.